Hi, I'm Elaine Body.
And I'm David Treadway.
And this is the Foodbod Pod.
With Matthews Cotswold Flour.
And Shanna's Sourdough. David, we're back.
We must be in your kitchen, Elaine.
We're in my kitchen. We did have the
pitter-patter of Bob's claws on the floor.
Yes, and for those of you that listened and watched the previous episode, you'll have seen Bob finding it very, very interesting.
He did. I think he's turned into a bit of a pizza expert.
Just a bit. So we really hope that you enjoyed the last episode. If you haven't listened to it yet, please do, because we had Scott back and we were making pizzas in my back garden. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it.
It was fabulous to watch you two working together. We had Scott's yeasted pizza bases and your sourdough pizza base, and they were absolutely delicious. The toppings. We also had a deep pan Detroit pizza that Scott prepared, which I've since tried. Not quite the same success that Scott had with his.
Hey, it's always a first time.
Yeah, I think it's a work in progress, that one.
I can't believe how much I enjoyed working with the dough. And the actual picking it up and putting it across your knuckles thing. And I know I'm repeating myself, so if you all heard me say this at the end of the last episode, it's because I did enjoy it that much.
I was amazed how good you were at shaping. You'd never done it before.
And, not that way.
And
no.
I've been making pizzas since I got an uni oven about a year ago, and I'm only just now getting good at shaping the round Neapolitan pizza bases. And you took it like a duck to water. You took to it.
I think you know what it is. I think because I'm so used to having dough around.
Yeah.
But also, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't scare me.
Yes.
What you do with it. And I think for anybody that's coming to this that's never made and never used dough or made a pizza or handled dough, it's probably going to seem more scary.
Yes.
Whereas I'm just used to so much dough being around.
But you weren't scared of overextending it. You weren't scared, and indeed didn't make any holes in the pizza base, which is is the thing I'm always absolutely terrified of. Because I'm sure that's.
I think definitely the fact of using your knuckles with it. And my concern was my nails. So if you're using your knuckles with it, it doesn't seem to be as bad. But to actually realise how stretchy and extendable the dough was.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to the episode yet, please do and watch it on video, because Scott is a master at pizza, and it was really good to have your sourdough version as well, because all Scots are yeasted. It was a nice contrast.
So, I mean, thoroughly enjoyed it. We love Scott. I will be doing more with Scott in the future. So absolutely, totally loved it. So please go back and listen if you haven't already. Go back and watch on YouTube. So on to today.
Yes, now tell us about what we've got in store for our listeners today, Elaine.
Today we have Sophie Carey coming to my kitchen. And Sophie has been on the podcast before. She is part of the Matthews family, and we had her on the podcast last year. She made some great recipes with us, some pretzel bites, a Danish butter cake and some ramen noodles. And I will be honest and say, when we recorded that last year, I didn't know a lot about her. I have spent more time with Sophie since then, and we've worked on stuff together, and she's got me involved in some of the things that she does. And I specifically asked her to come back to talk to us more about her baking heritage, her baking knowledge, as well as to come and bake some things for us. So I really want Sophie to share her story, really, because she's only young. She's more than half my age. She is, just a baking superstar. She's got tips just running off her left, right and centre, and such a complete and utter natural ease with anything baking, and so vastly knowledgeable. So we're going to learn more about Sophie, ask her about that background, where she's got that all from, and then be baking some things with her. It's
going to be a great episode.
Sophie, here we are in my kitchen. Welcome.
It's very lovely. It's a lovely kitchen. I would love this much space at home.
And this is your first time here, so thank you for coming all this way, because Sophia lives in a very different part of the country, so thank you for coming all this way.
No problem.
And we are going to be baking, but before we get into that, I wanted us just to talk a bit more about you, because everybody that has listened to the podcast or has watched anything will have seen you last year and a couple of our episodes and seen your recipes. I think the ramen noodles were very popular. I know David made them. And I remember one of my bakers made your Danish butter cake.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, love that.
Good.
She had to stop herself eating all of it in one go,
Quite
cut it into very small pieces. So we have had you on the podcast before, and on those occasions we have introduced you in your role as the bakery development manager for Matthews Cotswold Flour.
Yes.
But there's an awful lot more that I have learned about you of late in just baking royalty.
Oh, please.
Honestly, they're just your knowledge and your position in the baking world is just amazing. So could you just tell our listeners a bit more about how old are you?
I'm 26. I'm going to be 27 in 2 weeks' time.
I mean, you're just so young and you've done so much already. So
Well, it feels like it. Yeah. I mean, the first thing I suppose to note is that the industrial side of baking is very different to the home side, home bakers or anything to do with baking at home. And the industrial side of baking is really where I made my name and cut my teeth, I suppose.
So industrial as in what you mean is commercial bakeries?
Yeah, commercial bakeries, really anything kind of mass manufacture, even down to, really smaller businesses, but that industrial side, anything that is not packaged in small amounts for you to do at home, basically.
Okay.
I studied and got a degree in bakery technology management from the National Bakery School at London South Bank University, and that specialised quite heavily in industrial baking at the time. I think it's quite different now, but then it was all about learning the techniques and learning how to manage an industrial plant or a line, production line.
Oh, so it was
like
teaching you, it was training you to be able to go into that bigger environment.
Yeah, bigger environment more so than the smaller environments.
Okay.
Obviously, you learn the recipes, you learn the ratios so that you could be a baker in a small environment. But a lot of what you were gearing up for was working in the industry, we would call it, the industry more than as an artisan or as a craft baker. A big part of that, I suppose, in your final year, you do a lot of product development,
right.
NPD, new product development, which is something I really enjoyed doing. And that's where I found a bit of a passion, coming up with recipes, but more so troubleshooting. I think there's a misconception that product development is always, testing recipes and trying this and that and the other and being creative in a very flouncy way, but a lot of the time it's being creative in quite a logical way, looking at troubleshooting. And from then, I suppose that's where I ended up working, is really in new product development first it was actually for a sandwich manufacturer. I went and did in their test kitchen, creating new sandwiches as a graduate position for the first 6 months of my working life, which actually came in handy because they didn't have anyone on that team who knew a lot about bread. So I could go into the meetings that they had with their buyers, with bakeries that they worked with, to kind of actually articulate what we wanted for our customers. And then after that, I moved over to an ingredients manufacturer in bakery called Zealandia. They're a global company, but they manufacture premixes for bakeries to use, but also ingredient solutions. So a lot of, it might seem odd to a home baker, and I think a lot of home bakers frown upon it quite a lot, but a significant amount of bakeries are using some sort of premix, which is basically a big bag where you have most of the ingredients in. For a cake, for example, you just need to add oil and eggs. A lot of bakeries use them, and what they're really, really good for, especially these days with allergen control and consistency control, is helping craft bakeries, small bakeries that don't have the staff to cope with increased demand. They're able to know exactly what allergens are going into that product every single time they make it, and they know it comes out perfectly every single time they make it as well. So it just takes some of the variability out of it for them. And then after that, that's when I moved over to a company called Grupo Bimbo, which is the biggest bakery globally. And in the UK, they have the New York Bakery Co. brand, which is the bagels in the supermarkets. So I did their recipes for nearly 2 years before moving over to Matthews. That was my career from leaving university. But then obviously I do other things as well.
Yeah, you do other things. And you have a really posh title because you are a...
Oh, I'm a Freeman for the Worshipful Company of Bakers. So
what is the... You need to tell me. I know I asked you this before. What is the Worshipful Company of Bakers?
So it actually is a little bit like a cult in a way, in a weird way. There's quite a lot of what we would call livery guilds, which is from way back when. Basically any trade, you would have had a livery guild, which was the place to connect and network with other individuals from within your trade. So most of them have very lovely buildings in the city of London, and Bakers Hall is the one for the Worshipful Company of Bakers. I think people will know of Fishmongers Hall from the really tragic incident that happened there before. But there are all of these trades, glass makers, or there's even one for cookbook writers. There's one for bakers, there's one for butchers, there's one for leather craft, those kind of old school trades. They're very, very traditional, and as part of the Worshipful Company of Bakers connection with the National Bakery School because of their geographical closeness, the top student of the year is presented to the Worshipful Company of Bakers to receive the Freedom of the City, which basically means that you can drive sheep across London Bridge, which I appreciate sounds completely nuts to anyone who's not in the know.
Yeah.
Give it a bit of a Google because you'll find loads of weird information on it, but you have to be presented in front of the court. So I was the top student of my year at university, and I was presented to the court, and in some livery companies it's different, but in the Worshipful Company of Bakers it's quite selective. You can only really get in if you are presented, i.e. as a top student, if you are sponsored by someone that you know from the company has to sponsor you in, or from patronage. So if a family member, your parent or grandparent was a member, you can get in that way as well. But you have to pay your dues to get in. And these days it's about a 50-50 split of bakers, but also solicitors. It's not all bakers there, it's solicitors, it's art dealers, it's very, it's for people in the City of London, it's quite a status thing to be in. But for bakers, you're really in because you support, the baking industry. Yeah. And they do a lot of work with something called the Bakers Benevolent Fund, which is money that goes towards helping, worthy causes within the baking industry.
Sophie is also involved with ABST.
Yes.
Which is I always get this the wrong way around, which is the Alliance for Bakery Students and Trainees.
Correct.
I always get the trainees and students the wrong way around. So recently they had their yearly conference, which Sophie organises.
Yeah, I'm the conference chairman for the ABST.
So it's supporting and celebrating the students that are learning to be bakers.
Yeah, basically the objective is to get students from education into work. You see a real disparity these days between the number of students that are training versus the amount that end up in bakery. Especially, I would note, at the moment, bakery classes at the colleges and universities, I would say, are upwards of 90% female. You get into the industry, the industrial side of baking, and it's the other way around. It's flipped completely. There's rarely women working in the industrial side of baking. It's quite uncommon. So really the ABST is all about linking those students with work opportunities, connecting them with businesses who might hire them, furthering their education. So, the conference is a big part of that, but also we do some work with the government to make sure that the students are actually learning the right stuff in their curriculum, because there's no use them learning the wrong things. People won't want to hire them if they're learning the wrong stuff. So that's really important as well. And making sure that the colleges feel supported. We work with kind of upwards of 15 different colleges and universities that offer baking qualifications in the UK and over in Ireland as well. So it's quite a big operation, but it's really the focus, is we've got to bridge the gap. On one hand, you've got students who are struggling to find the right kind of jobs, and then I hear as well on the other side of me companies who are really struggling to hire. So there's a disconnect there, and it's trying to bridge that gap. Yeah.
And it was great to see them all, because the conference includes a competition element. There's different categories that they can all bake for. So you've got tables and tables all these different cakes, all these different breads, and all these different biscuits, and just loads of it. Amazing to see all of that.
Yeah, the competitions are a really important part of it. I think it's quite rare nowadays. There are still a few events which run traditional competitions like that, but it's very, very important in furthering the students' learning in a way that separates them from what their tutors are telling them. Obviously, the tutors are all fantastic, but if they only ever hear feedback from their tutors, it's only going to get them so far. That competition not only teaches them, a different perspective from the judges, but it also gives them, it teaches them how to handle perhaps negative feedback, how to take it constructively, how to move on from that. And it gives them a chance to be competitive with their peers as well before they get into the industry, because it's, you come across the same people time and time again in the industry, so you need to get to know them as a student so that you can all get on.
Yeah.
Baking, in the baking industry, the industrial side of it, not so much the home baker side, but the industrial side of the industry is so incestuous. I can't tell you how incestuous it is. You can't sneeze in the baking industry without someone knowing you've done it. And that, I think, is more prevalent in the younger generation of people in the baking industry, who are few and far between. It's, me and about, 30 others that I probably count that I would call young members of the baking industry. But we all know each other. So you've got to get to know each other, otherwise you're going to be in trouble when you're looking for your next position. And what I would say, every job I've had in the baking industry so far, it's either come from a recommendation, a direct recommendation, or from a headhunter. I've not applied for a single position. It's come from being sought out. So it's really, really important that the students get to grips with that at the time and start learning who all these people are, because it will matter.
You've done so much. I'm feeling highly inadequate.
They say jack of all trades.
Matthews are very lucky to have you. Gosh, all the connections you have and all the knowledge that you have. I mean, I know from talking to you. I mean, there's just nothing about baking you don't know.
Every day's a school day. You try and learn more things all the time. But I do think that that's where my background in product development, and especially actually time spent at, for example, the New York Bakery Co., that really came in handy, because you're learning how to troubleshoot, and once you know how to troubleshoot, you can create recipes like that. Once you understand the functionality of ingredients and processes, the creativity flows naturally. But if you're trying to be creative without that kind of fundamental experience, you're just going to hit a brick wall every single time. So it makes it easier to have that kind of Rolodex of knowledge in your head.
So when you came over to Matthews, is that the first time that you're working in a flour mill?
Yeah.
So there must have been, or there must still be, a lot of fun for you with then dealing with different flours.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not, I've done similar work before in various other jobs. You're always looking at ancient grains. That's been a trend since I can remember. Ancient grains, heritage grains, always trendy. So you're always doing something with that in the industry if you're working. But it's very exciting to be on the front foot of it with the mill, and it's nice as well to be working in more, crossing over into home bakers as well, because it allows you to be so much more creative. When you work in just industrial baking, you are stuck a lot of the time by budget restraints, by practicalities, allergens, everything like that. You just can't do too much. You're very much in a box, and it's about how you move around in that box. Whereas working for home bakers, it really gives you the chance to think really creatively. To working on such a smaller scale.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we see more and more of your recipes appearing on the back of the packs.
Yeah.
And a lot of recipes going on the website, and you're doing a lot of things, social media. So if anybody wants to see different things Sophie's making. A very, very popular video that's gone out recently with...
Oh, my Queen of Man.
Yeah.
I would say as well, though, if anyone is interested in learning more about the industrial side of baking, the other thing I do on the side is write for Bakery Business magazine, which is a trade publication, and I'm the editor of that magazine. You can get it. It doesn't really matter if you're a home baker, but if you are interested in learning more about it, you can subscribe to it. It's free to subscribe to.
Okay.
But that gives you... an overview every 2 months of the news in the industry. So it's quite interesting if you're a home baker to follow what's going on in industry as well. So you might be ahead of the trend sometimes. Yeah.
I know you spend a lot of time at Matthews dealing with trade bakers and bigger trade accounts and things like that, because I've heard the questions that you answer and the knowledge that you have. So do you therefore get involved with development of new flours and new mixes and things?
Yeah, a bit, definitely. A big part of my job is talking to commercial customers, trade bakers, people from micro bakeries all the way up to massive industrial customers. You know, I tend to talk to them a lot about what kind of flour they need, trying to find a product that we have that matches up to their specification that they're after, but also giving them some advice on where I see trends developing and giving them a bit of a roundup of where they might want to focus their product development ideas. So yeah, we do a lot of that sort of conversation with them, but I do work with Mark Riley at the mill a little bit here and there to come up with, new flours or bread mixes, things like that. Bread mixes, not so much for the trade customers, but definitely flours for them. Quite often we'll pinpoint, an area where we want to develop. For example, at the moment, it would be looking at regenerative range, expanding on that. And Mark will come up with the product that he wants to launch, and he'll ask me, okay, well, as the baker, what would be your ideal protein content for this flour? What would be your ideal elasticity for this flour? What would be your ideal water absorption? Or what would you make with this product? So we work in that way together, where he really is the expert at sourcing the grain and getting the grist sorted, the grist is combining all of the different grain varieties to get a well-rounded flour at the end. But he'll quite often ask me for practical application, what would be the ideal levels on this flour.
So do you test the flours before anybody else? Do you test them in the bakery test kitchen?
Yeah.
So you can give them feedback if something needs to be changed?
Yeah, the one really good example of that recently was with the regenerative all-purpose flour. I really did roll my eyes when I was told they were going to do a regen all-purpose, because as a baker I quite like something really specific. All-purpose to me doesn't sound amazing from a baker's perspective, but Mark gave me it to try, in a little bag, and I was really impressed by it, how well it performed. So I had to kind of go back into his office with my head hung and say, yeah, you were right, it's really good.
And I've heard you talk about it, so I know you've talked about, what you can do with it, how much you can stretch it. And I mean, I know from when I've worked with it how well it works in different ways.
Yeah, the elasticity for me is what sells it every single time now. I use it for all of my puff pastry, flaky pastries, anything laminated, anything that you want a really good stretch on. I even made phyllo pastry, which I do not advise to do because it is a pain to make phyllo pastry, but I wanted to see how far you could stretch it, and it stretched really well. But the recipe I tested it on was for Scottish butteries, which I don't know if you've had before.
No.
They're like a kind of mix between a roll and a croissant from Scotland. They're just full of butter and sometimes lard as well, which makes them very, very tasty. And you're supposed to have them with raspberry jam, but they just laminated so nicely. And I took the dough into Mark's office. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Excited about dough.
Yeah, but no, that's how we work together to kind of come up with the flours. Really, it's Mark that is the genius on that side and does all of the logistics of it, and I just tell him, well, no, if I was a baker, I'd want 3% less protein, or I'd want, a bit more water absorption than that.
So is there anything in the offing we should get excited about?
Definitely, just the regen range, how it's advancing, I think will be really exciting, especially into the wholemeal flours. I think that they will be really special. I think that he's onto something there with that grist, but also I really like our pizza blend, and we're doing some stuff with regenerative pizza blend as well, which I'm really excited about. So I think it'll give people another option for something really sustainable, but it's a nice product. So excited.
And I have to say, with the regenerative flours, you're coming from the angle of the benefits of regenerative farming, but if you want to just take it down to the home bakers, what do you want? You need to know if a flour works.
Yeah.
And they do. And actually, when you put the regenerative flours into a starter, it goes whoosh. Yeah. And they work really nicely. And the traditional white's really nice as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
anything stone milled, I'm always really excited when we do anything stone milled. I think it has such great flavour and texture, and it's so great to see the kind of flecks of bran in there as well. That's always really exciting.
And that's the thing, the traditional white actually will come out brown. Yeah, because it's got some flecks of brown still in it from being stone ground. Which means actually when you work with it and you handle it, it handles like a whole grain flour.
Yes.
Yeah, even though it's called a white flour. So yeah. Oh, okay. So
there are some exciting things coming. I think this year is going to be all about expanding the regenerative range, and then with the idea that next year then we'll be on to some other blends of flours using things like barley and different varieties of wheat. Devon orange has been a variety that we've been looking into quite a lot recently. So I think this year is all about getting our regenerative range going, with the idea that next year will be more about kind of, I suppose, more exciting, interesting, different flours. But, you know, for Matthews, focusing so much on regenerative, this year is about putting our money where our mouth is, you know, and getting that range available for people to start using.
So you're going to bake for us today.
Yes.
What are you making?
I'm going to make two things today. I am making a salted honey pecan cake with some honey that is very, very local to me in North Devon. And I'm also going to be making something much simpler, which is chouquettes, which are my favourite treat to get when I go to France. And it's just choux pastry topped with nibbed sugar, but the fundamentals are there of choux pastry, which is really important.
So many people are scared of choux pastry.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can give some tips as we go along as to make these things a lot easier than people seem to think they need to be.
Yeah.
You're taking me right back when my mum used to throw dinner parties. There was always profiteroles.
Yeah. It's such a classic dessert. But, you know, once you've mastered choux pastry, because it can be a bit daunting, but it's hot. You don't need to keep everything cold. You know, it's a great one to make in the summer because it doesn't matter if it's hot outside, you can still make choux pastry. And you can make it into so many different things. I mean, I've done big sheets of it before, and you can assemble it into a big layered dessert, or, you know, even for savouries, you just pipe some on and top them with a little bit of cheese, and that's really, really nice. It's a lovely little savoury nibble. Yeah, exactly. But once you've nailed it, you realise how much you can make with it, and it's just the best skill to have.
Okay. Well, in which case then we better do some cooking and some prepping. So let's get ourselves set up.
You're listening to the Foodbod Pod with Matthews Cotswold Flour and Shanna's Sourdough.
Shanna's Sourdough has everything you need to start making beautiful sourdough, from the starter to the roaster and everything in between. Shanna's Sourdough for all of your Foodbod sourdough baking essentials.
Matthews Cotswold Flour, inspired baking from Britain's artisan flour miller.
Sophie, what are we starting with?
So I'm starting out with a recipe I've been working on after I was quite inspired by a visit to my local honey farm.
Okay.
I'm quite into holistic health, and I'm not a medical expert. I've been reading up on it a bit more recently. But the amount of micronutrients that are in honey, it's something that I was determined after that visit I've got to use more of in my baking. So I've got a jar of local Devon honey, and I'm going to be making, it's a salted honey pecan cake, which is made almost in the style of an upside down cake, where you use the honey to make almost a sort of caramel that goes on the base of the tin with the pecans, and then you pour the cake over the top, and when you turn it out, you've got a lovely kind of caramelized pecan topping.
Wow.
It's really, really tasty, and it's a nice way to use honey. You're not using it instead of sugar, but you're using it instead of making a caramel for the top.
If someone didn't want to use honey, could they use maple syrup? Does it work in the same way? It's different.
It's a different consistency. So if you're not going to use honey, I think you'd be better off making a caramel from sugar and butter.
Okay.
But because, you know, not everyone is interested in honey, but it would taste just as good. And if you wanted to, for that, you could add to that caramel a splash of maple syrup to get the flavour through.
So if anybody's watching on video, we're surrounded by lots and lots of ingredients. So is this the one that you're going to make in a mixer?
Yes.
Okay.
I like to make my cakes in a mixer, mainly because I like to use butter instead of oil or anything like that.
Okay.
And it just takes an age to beat butter and sugar together. And I'm a big fan of the all-in-one method. So it keeps your cakes really nice and light. And something important actually is that we're going to use a little bit of wholemeal spelt in the actual cake mix.
Right, I'm going to back you up.
Go on.
Remember, I'm not a baker like you. So tell me for those that don't know, what's the all-in-one method?
Oh, okay, yeah, it basically just that there's kind of, for standard cake making, butter-based cakes, there's two trains of thought, which is that you can either cream the butter and sugar together,
I did that at school.
Yeah, until they're really, really light and fluffy, and then add your eggs and flour, you know, in various stages so that it doesn't split. That's really, really good for getting an amazing light cake, but I'm not that fussed about the lightness with this cake. It's almost a little bit stodgy in a good way. It's kind of quite a rustic cake. So all-in-one method is literally where you just put all of your cake ingredients in the bowl and just mix them until they're mixed.
A bit like I make sourdough.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're taking out some of the steps. So
Exactly.
when you cream the butter and sugar,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I would have learned to be make like a Victoria sandwich, that kind of thing.
You're
so
just
you're
incorporating
a lighter sponge.
Exactly, yeah.
So I watched you. You've already greased the tin. So we have an 18 centimetre diameter cake tin.
Yeah.
And you've chosen my deeper one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Greased and lined. It's quite important with this cake. The honey is a lovely flavour, but it does get quite messy. So it's really important just to put some paper on the first kind of inch underneath.
If you're looking on the screen, you can see. So the paper is not coming all the way up the side. You've only done it along the bottom.
You can see there, it's kind of
all
the way around, but you don't want it. Yeah, it doesn't need to come up all the way, but also importantly, you will need to put this tin on a tray before it goes in the oven. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time cleaning your oven.
And if you do that to my oven, then you'll be the one staying here to clean it. Okay.
We'll put it on a tray.
Okay. So what do we need to do?
First thing to do is just to add some salt to some of this honey. I just think it gives it a nice edge, a little bit of a sophisticated flavour. Takes away just some of the sweetness of the honey. Really, really nice just to add a little bit in there.
So Sophie has tipped some honey into the bowl.
Yeah.
I take it you've written this up so we've got quantities of people.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about 1/4 cup. I find a cup measurement is the most useful for honey because you can oil your cup and then tip it out.
Yeah.
But I will have it in grams as well.
So 1/4 cup is usually about 30 grams kind of thing?
Yeah, and then it's about 1/2 teaspoon of salt.
So you're just stirring the honey with the salt?
Yeah, you just want it all dispersed through there.
Is this like the idea of salted caramel, that kind of thing?
Yeah, kind of. Salted honey is like the new salted caramel in a way.
Oh, is it a thing?
It's a thing, yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
But I'm quite interested to use honey just because it's of the health benefits I've been reading about. In particular, well, you're gonna, once you've done that, you just want to literally just pour it.
So you mix the salt into the honey, and that's going to go straight into the lined tin.
Yeah. If you've got hay fever, a 1/2 teaspoon every day of the year of local honey will get rid of your hay fever symptoms because you're microdosing yourself with local pollen. But also, particularly for women, honey and the micronutrients available in honey are really good for managing hormone levels and just keeping your hormone levels regulated.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but at my age, you'd need a jar a day.
There's
only so much that you'd be able to have to manage your hormone
Similarly,
levels.
actually, with spelt flour as well, because we're going to use some spelt flour in this recipe. And anything with increased fibre like spelt is actually really good at helping your body to release excess estrogen, which can just help to regulate your hormones. So it's really interesting. There's a lot of good books about it. It's all a bit hippy-dippy, but it is very interesting.
I'm going to dump the HRT. I'm just going to go into spelt and honey.
Yeah.
I will pre-warn my husband and son. Experimentation is happening.
It's very interesting, but
there's. I mean, I'm a big believer in diet, and what you put into your body is what you will get out. And I think that the more that you can look after yourself, I don't consume anything that I don't think is going to benefit me.
Yeah.
I just don't see the point.
There
so we've got a nice layer.
Just a little layer of honey on the bottom.
Okay.
And then you just want to take the pecan halves.
If you don't have pecans or you don't like them, could you use walnuts?
Yeah, walnuts, almonds, you know, anything like that. Cashews would probably work as well. Or you could do fruit. You could do apples, pears.
So it's going to have that look almost of like a fruitcake?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can take the time and place them really neatly, or you can just scatter them on the bottom. Either is fine. You might get a few that stick to the paper when it's released, so quite often I like to put a neat layer around the outside and then just scatter some in the middle.
Okay, so Sophie's just placing some nuts all the way around the edge. So whilst you're doing this, because this is going to take a little bit of time, something that we were having a conversation about, which I'm really keen for us to bring in for you to explain to listeners, okay? Something we see a lot of in sourdough discussions or people put in Facebook groups is bakers' percentages. Explain to me and the listeners, what is the point of bakers' percentages?
Yeah, so bakers' percentages is the way I was taught. I wouldn't, the same as you, I wouldn't really advise people get into it as home bakers, because it can add another level of confusion, but it's the way I was taught as a professional. And basically, bakers' percentages, what's good about it is that it helps you to scale up or down your recipes as much or as little as you like.
Okay, so let's just backtrack so someone doesn't know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
What you might see is someone puts up a recipe and they go, I used 69% of this and 2% of this and 5% of this and 3% of this. And I always want to go back to them and go, and what was your starting point?
Exactly.
You're using 69% of what? So as a home baker, you look at that and you go, what? That I'm never going to make sourdough, because this is it scares people.
Yeah, so it's really important when you train as a professional baker that your recipes are not for making one tin or one cake or whatever it is, or that even they should be for making 10 cakes. You should be able to take your recipe and say, okay, well, today I have to make 35 of these cakes. I don't need to go and write a new recipe because my recipe is scalable. And by that, I just mean that you could make more or less of it as it goes. What baker's percentage is based on, 100% is always your flour. So right. Even if you're using two different flours, let's say I'm using 90% white, 10% spelt, that makes my 100%. I know, okay, roughly I'm going to need to make X amount of loaves, 60 loaves. So I know I'm going to need, let's say, 30 kilos of flour.
Okay, so if that's your starting point.
3 kilos of flour, whatever. Yeah. That's your starting point. From there, every other ingredient is a percentage of that. So if I'm doing, I often work in baker's percentages at home just because it's how my brain's been trained to work. If I'm making a loaf of bread, 500 grams of flour. Mm-hmm. I like 2% salt in mine, which is quite salty, but I like salt. I know that that's 2% of 500. Right. 20 grams. So there's the bit that has never been explained to me. You're starting with the flour, so it's always about the flour. So the percentage relates to your flour amount. Yes.
So if you want to make life easy and you say we've got 100 grams of flour, if you've got your 60% of something, you're talking about 60% of that 100 grams.
Exactly. And what it's especially useful for, if you make a lot of cakes at home, it is a faff to get your head around the maths, but if you make loads of cakes, if you're transitioning from being a home baker into maybe making some for customers at home, it's really important that you get to know baker's percentages because of eggs. Because you can't spend, if you have to make, let's say yesterday you had to make 7 cakes, today you've got to make 12, it will prevent you from having to go, right, well, how many eggs do I have to crack and deshell to get the right amount of eggs per mix? You can say, crack all of your eggs beforehand, whisk them up, you've got liquid egg there, and you can then say, okay, well, my recipe calls for 12% egg, so I can then work out from the flour how much that's going to weigh. So you're weighing the eggs? It's all weighing rather than doing one egg, one egg, one egg, one egg. So it helps you to... Okay. Exactly. It helps you to be more precise. Because eggs are all different weights and stuff anyway. Yeah, exactly. For bakers, professional bakers, it's really important because it will help you be more consistent, and it will also save you time on scaling up or down. As a home baker, I don't often recommend it because it leads to more confusion. But if you are someone who does a lot of baking and some days you're making more, some days you're making less, instead of doing a mix, cleaning that away, a new mix, cleaning that away, a new mix, cleaning that away, it does help in the end if you can get your head around that. And I see that, but I think that the whole thing for home bakers, especially if you're making 1 or 2 loaves, and people coming straight into that, I just think it's just a level of confusion. Ultimately, it's for trade bakers. It's not really for home bakers, but it's the first thing that I recommend to home bakers who are expanding into running a business. Right. If I've got customers at the mill who are micro bakers and they're asking for advice on how they can progress further, the first thing I ask them is, are you using baker's percentage? Right. Because it's really important for your consistency as someone putting out 50 loaves a day rather than someone who's making 2 or 3 a day. Okay. That's where it's key. Well, I hope that's cleared that up for someone. I hope that they found that useful. Right. We have our tin. We have a very, very pretty layer of pecans. Yes. It looks a bit like a Christmas cake top. Yes, it will do, yes. Okay. Yeah. So what's going in next? Next, just need to weigh up all the ingredients for the actual cake mix. So that's the topping done. All of my cake mixes are based off of a standard ratio in my head. Most of my cakes are based on, for just a single serve cake, they're based on 225 of
So
everything.
225 grams of butter.
Butter, sugar and flour, and then 4 eggs.
Okay.
And then you can vary then which kind of sugars you like to use. So I'm going to do a mixture of dark brown and some golden caster sugar as well, just for flavour and colour. Really.
I hear a lot about golden caster sugar. It's very popular.
It is very popular. You know, is it different than white in flavour? To me, not so much. It does add a nicer colour.
So what's your split if you're doing 225 grams of sugar in total?
I'll be doing 190 of golden caster sugar and then just 35 of dark brown. You don't need very much of it to get that kind of treacly flavour really. Just adds a bit of colour as well.
Dark brown soft sugar. It's got a really, you can really smell it, can't you?
Yeah, if you ever run out of it at home,
oh, wow.
What you can do in a stand mixer in a KitchenAid, you can add a packet of caster sugar and 2 to 3 tablespoons of black treacle and get it on to mix, and that will give you this.
See, that's why she's here. It's the tips. Wow, okay.
And then
that makes me really think of Christmassy time.
Yeah.
That kind of smell.
You can put it as well if you ever find that you get really hard sugar. I normally keep my sugar wrapped up in cling film just to avoid it getting hard like that. But if you just put a damp kitchen towel in the tub with it for a day or two, that will draw the moisture back in and soften it back up for you.
So that's the complete difference from flour then?
Yes.
So you want to be adding some moisture to sugar as opposed to taking it out from
you
the
don't
flour.
necessarily want moisture in there all the time, but if you find that it's gone rock solid in the cupboard, that's a nice way to just kind of bring it back to life. I'm going to add also some vanilla bean paste, just about a teaspoon of this. Okay. It's one of my favourite ingredients to have in my cupboard.
There's a lot of different ones around at the moment.
This is my favourite.
What make is that?
Nielsen Massey. It's the only one I've ever really used. I've used a couple of the others and I don't like the flavour very much. And that's got a nice consistency. It's lots of beans in there, so really, really good. I'm going to add a little pinch of salt as well. Very important always to season your sweets.
Why do we put salt in a sweet recipe?
It brings out the flavour better.
Okay.
So if you have just sweet, it will be very bland. It's the same as if you don't season your pasta or you don't season your food that you're cooking. If you don't have that salt in there, the other flavours are lacklustre. If you have the salt in there, it brings out the caramelly notes, it brings out the kind of, in this it's a lot of what we would call brown flavours in industrial terms, but you're bringing out the best in those flavours. If you have it without that, it will be, God, that's so sweet, you can't taste anything.
Right, okay.
It's the same sweet, you're just adding a little bit of salt, means you can taste it.
Okay.
Flours. So I like to add, it's mainly self-raising for this.
So self-raising flour, if you don't have it, you can make using a mixture of plain flour and baking powder.
You can, yeah. But I also do like to add some spelt flour to this one as well.
I like putting spelt flour in cakes and things.
Yeah, I don't add loads, just a little to kind of... So again, it's about 190 of the self-raising. And then the rest, again, up to that 225, topped up with wholemeal spelt. I also do like to add a little bit of ground ginger and ground cinnamon to this cake. It's about half a teaspoon of each. You don't want loads because it's not a spice cake, but I think it helps to bring out the flavours of the pecans.
Okay.
And it helps to bring out the flavour as well of the wholemeal spelt.
So we've got eggs?
Yep, 4 eggs.
Any particular size or as they come?
Medium, as they come is fine. For, again, this is, I think, quite a common misconception that the size of your eggs should matter that much as a home baker.
No.
If you're making things on a really big scale, you might well find that you have to be cautious about the size of your egg, because a 5 gram difference from an egg, if you're using 300 eggs, if every egg is 5 grams different, that's a big amount adding up. But if you're a home baker, it will make absolutely no difference to you.
And, you know, I have this in my enriched sourdough recipe. It doesn't make any difference the size of the eggs.
That's it, all in.
How long would you have it in the mixer for?
Literally about 3 or 4 minutes. You just want to mix it until it's all come together. There's no massive lumps anymore. Don't want to overmix it because of the spelt flour.
Okay, so you're going to use the paddle.
Yes.
And for about 3 or 4 minutes.
Yep, that's
okay.
it.
Oh, it's all nicely mixed, a nice caramelly colour. Okay, so how is that going to be going in? By the way, the oven is currently preheating. Yes, in my kitchen there is an oven being preheated because this is a requirement of the baker. So it's being preheated to 160 fan, 180 conventional oven, which 180 is about 360 Fahrenheit.
Yes, correct.
Okay, so.
My next, I suppose, tip, one of the things I would always encourage people to invest in if you do baking, anything baking that isn't bread at home, is to get a set of these mechanical ice cream scoops.
Right.
I have these, I have them in a few different sizes, and they are my most used kitchen item, I think. For depositing cake, you'll see why in a second, but also I use my smaller one for portioning out cookies.
Now I get it for like cookies and the thing, but to be putting a full amount of cake mix into your cake tin, you're still going to use it, to give you an even level?
To give me an even level. I sometimes use it as well if a lot of my cake recipes make 2 cakes, you know, or 2 loaf tins or whatever. It means that you can make sure without weighing that you're getting an equal amount in each cake tin, but also for this and for anything I do where it has a kind of upside down bottom, I suppose, you're dispersing it evenly without pressing down on it, so you're not ruining the design that you've just laid down.
So you're just going to be scraping out and plopping it in as if you were adding ice cream. So if anybody wants to see what she's doing on video.
And you always go around the outside first, because if you don't have enough, or you find that for some reason it's not stretched as far as you thought, you can always level it into the inside, but it's much harder to level it round to the outside afterwards.
So just basically scooping out a load of the cake mix and plopping it into the pan all across the top of the nuts.
A lot of my cake recipes quite often they'll either do 2 tins or they'll do a tin plus a few fairy cakes or muffins, because I think quite often people are making something for an event. You want to be able to taste it before the event to know whether you've got it right. So that's why I end up with just a little bit of surplus, because I would normally put it in muffin cases, and that way you've got something to test before you serve it to other people.
I might be able to find something.
I'm just tapping it out.
You're just tapping it. You don't
just
need
gently.
to spread it.
No, because it's got butter in it, it will self-level. Anything with oil, you really want to kind of spread out, whereas anything with butter, because the butter will melt, it will self-level.
Okay.
Ready to go in the oven.
So once it's ready to go, how long does it need to go in the oven for?
Between 35 and 45 minutes. It's dependent really on how deep you do it, but same with anything, a little skewer or a knife into it, if it comes out clean, then you're pretty good to go. Okay,
and as the big tip, it's going to go on a baking tray.
It's going to go on a baking tray.
So it's not seeping into the oven.
Exactly. The honey is delicious, but it is messy. So you want to make sure that you put something down, and it will look like you've got a ruined tray at the end of it, but it soaks off really easily.
So she says.
It does. I know this. I've tried
I'll let you know.
There you go. Okay. It's ready to go in the oven.
All right, brilliant. Shanna's sourdough for all of your sourdough baking needs.
Matthews Cotswold Flour, bringing you Britain's largest speciality flour range.
What's your second recipe, Sophie?
It's a really, really simple one. It's for chouquettes, but really it's for choux pastry.
Okay.
Chouquettes are something I have every single time I go to France. We spend quite a lot of time in France, but it's basically little choux pastry buns. They're not filled with anything, and they're just topped with nibbed sugar. So they're not too sweet, but they just have a little crunch on the top of something sweet, and they're just the perfect snack for me.
So the nibbed sugar thing?
Yes.
So they're just the little white bits of sugar?
It's just kind of compressed sugar into little...
That's what you see on the top of some cakes and things?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You can get it on Amazon, or at Bakery Bits, I think, have it. It comes in a really big box, and then it keeps forever. So it's nice to have for making these, because they are very Moorish.
So I know people have a fear of choux pastry.
Yes.
What's your top tips of choux pastry?
The first thing is you've got to cook your flour off correctly. So what choux pastry starts with is melted butter with milk and water, or you can just do water, and then you add in your flour, and you need to cook that off thoroughly. So it starts sticking to the pan. Once we add the eggs, it will all release, but you need to cook that flour off very, very thoroughly.
Like making a roux?
Yes, yeah. If you've not cooked the flour off enough, the starches are not combined, you know, they're not gloopy enough, which means that you're going to get a flat pastry. Also really important to use a flour with the right protein percentage. If you use something with very low protein, you're not going to get great results, which is why I really like the all-purpose for this, because normally I used to use quite a weak bread flour for my choux pastry to get the best lift from it. So they're the key things. You see quite a lot people talking about when you know you've got enough eggs, you'll get a V running off the spatula. That is true. So just make sure you're careful about adding the eggs. You could always add more, but you can't take them away once you've added them in. So if you've added too much egg, you've really over-egged it, you're done. You know.
And what can you do with that if you've done that?
What you could do with it actually is spread it out on a baking tray instead of piping it. Bake it off in the oven. You'll still get a bit of a rise from it, but it wouldn't give you defined eclairs or profiteroles or anything like that. But what you can then do with it is make a kind of layered cake with it. So what I've done before is layers of choux pastry with a filling on the inside, which was a custard with whipped cream folded through, another layer of that choux pastry, and then chocolate on the top.
So if you have over-egged it...
You've over-egged your pudding.
You've over-egged it. It's not wasted.
No, you can do something with it. You can make a layered dessert, but you couldn't really pipe it. You'll get slugs if you try and pipe it out. You'll get bad definition. So it's really important to just be careful about the eggs that you're adding.
Okay, right. So where are you beginning?
So started off, I've got about 120 mils of water in there.
So we've got a medium-sized saucepan.
Yeah.
You've already put 120 millilitres of water.
Yeah.
And now you're going to add some milk.
Yeah, I do tend to weigh my liquids as
I always
grams.
weigh liquids because I just think it's more definite. But also, if you've already got a bowl on the scales that you've been putting your flour and everything else in,
yeah,
just you do it with your liquids as well.
Yeah, anything with the same viscosity as water, just weigh it. If you've got something with a thicker viscosity like honey or golden syrup, maybe even, or yogurt, you're going to get, you know, more volume per gram.
I would still weigh it. So my recipes are all still based on it being weighed.
Yeah, a lot of the time I would weigh it as well. It just, for me, then depends on the recipe. Some of them you've got to be careful about adding too much of that sort of liquid. Some of them you don't really need to be that careful. So
now we're adding butter.
Yes, butter next.
So again, the butter is softened. How much butter are we adding?
110 grams of butter. Okay. Again, like quite a fundamental pastry. So once you've mastered this, you can use it for a lot of different things. And you'll remember the ratios as well in your head once you've got it right.
Choux pastry you can use for so many things.
Yeah, I use it all
Sweet,
the time.
savoury.
It's a really good one as well for the summer months, because if you've ever been told you can't make pastry because your hands are too hot, this is all done hot. So you don't need to worry about it. Same as hot watercress pastry as well. You know, it's all done hot.
Do you believe in that though, if your hands are too hot?
No, not at all. I don't believe in that these days. The only thing that I would believe in that for, perhaps, is if you're making full puff pastry.
Yeah.
But what I would more say is if you... I've never met anyone that runs hot enough that they are melting butter with their bare hands in seconds. What I would say is you need to make sure that everything's thoroughly chilled if you're going to, you know, make puff pastry. But it's more about that than it is about having hot hands. Then we're just going to get this on the stove, melt it.
Okay.
You just basically want to melt it and bring it to a simmer.
So we've got the water, the milk, the butter, and that's just going to bring...
I'll tell you what, actually, as well, we're going to add about a teaspoon of caster sugar. You can add this in with the flour.
Is that all the sugar that goes in it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we're going to put nibbed sugar on the top. You don't want too much in there, but also you could then use this recipe for a savoury choux pastry as well. So if you wanted to top it with cheese, I would still recommend adding that pinch of sugar because it helps you get that caramelisation in the oven.
Okay.
It's called
and a bit of salt.
Little bit of salt as well, just a pinch, because I've used unsalted butter today, whereas I would normally use salted butter.
Again, the recipe would all be written up.
Yep.
So the pan is now on the hob or stove, wherever you are, and just going to be on a medium heat just to melt the butter and bring it to a simmer.
Yeah. While that's going, I'm just going to get my flour weighed out as well.
How much flour are you having?
Just about 120 grams.
So you're using, all-purpose flour.
Yeah. It's, again, really good for it because it's a bit higher in protein than any of the kind of plain flours.
Okay.
You want that extra protein in this. A lot of bakers, French bakers, will use bread flour for making their choux pastry.
Okay.
You need that strength
So you want
to
it
hold
strong?
it up. Yeah.
Yeah.
You really do.
Because I would have thought, I mean, if I was thinking I was going to make choux pastry, I was going to do that kind of baking, I would have moved towards plain flour.
Yeah. I think that's quite common.
Okay.
People think that quite a lot. Similarly with puff pastry or rough puff pastry, better to use something with a little bit of extra protein. If you think about a short crust pastry, you're never really working it very much. When you make it, you're rubbing fat into flour, you're not developing gluten there because you want it to be really short when you eat it. With flaky pastry or rough puff pastry or puff pastry, you're working that gluten anyway because you're doing lamination, so you need to find a flour that will work with you rather than against you. Similarly with this pastry, choux pastry, we're going to be kind of mixing it while it's going to be really hot. We're going to be mixing it. You need something that will give you the strength rather than aiming for something with a really short bite.
So you need flour that's going to stand up to the work
100%.
it's got to do to a certain
100%.
extent.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So whilst we're talking about the protein percentages then, you've used the Matthews all-purpose flour. So in this one, we've got...
It's 10.5% protein.
10.5% protein.
Yeah.
If somebody has got an all-purpose or a bread flour that's got higher than that, that's okay?
That would be okay.
How high would you go?
I wouldn't go any higher than 12%, really.
Right, okay.
If you're getting up to over 12%, you might find that it's a little tough when
Yeah.
it comes to the eat. You want to kind of aim for somewhere in the middle, really. So if you're
Actually,
going to
I
use
find-
bread, go for a lower protein bread. If you're going to use plain, try and go for a higher protein plain, unless you want it to be specifically very short. It's just come up to a simmer, so I'm just going to add in my flour.
So the water, milk and butter has come up to a simmer and the flour's going in. And this is where you're cooking the flour,
Absolutely.
so stirring.
Yeah, and really give it a good stir until it's all completely incorporated. And then after that, you want to start cooking out that flour a little bit.
Cooking the flour is doing what?
You're gelatinizing that starch, which is stabilizing it for when it goes in the oven. So it means that you're going to get as much puff from it as you possibly can.
So that's going to help it puff up.
Exactly. You can see how much thicker it's going already.
Yeah. So this is when you have to really keep stirring with choux
Yeah.
pastry, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You
And
want
it
to
should
really
get to a point of
stir
being
it.
smooth.
It should do. It doesn't really matter if you've got little lumps and bumps in it, especially because we are going to mix the eggs in on a stand mixer just to keep it cool. It will go smooth, especially because you can use a spatula just to kind of press down those lumps. You can see it's almost starting to form a bit of a dough.
Yeah. So it's coming now. It's coming a lot thicker.
Yeah.
It is like a huge roux.
Yes.
If you've ever made a roux for making a sauce,
Yeah.
that's what the smell is as well.
Yes. And you're starting to get not a stickiness on the bottom, but you'll notice where it's starting to cook on the bottom. There's
Yeah,
almost
you've got
a bit of a
little layer.
skin.
Yeah.
That's what you want to encourage.
So
and
you
you
want
want
that
to cook
little
it out
skinner.
past the point where you think you should.
Okay.
So it's really coming
Makes sense.
together now. So we've got it really well cooked out now. It's almost like a dough. You know,
it's a single solid piece.
single solid mash. You've got a really good little skin formed on the bottom of the pan.
Yeah.
That's what you want.
It's got that little layer on the pan that makes you want to cry because you think you're never going to wash it off.
That's what the egg does.
That's your kind of layer that you want.
Yeah. So I've just turned the heat off because that's done. And then we just got to leave it to cool just for a few minutes. So what?
Surely if you put egg in that now, it's going to curdle.
Exactly. So what I like to do is just use a spatula and push
And spread it around the
edges of the pan
so that it'll cool off
to try and
faster.
cool it a little bit quicker. And while we do that, we can crack our eggs into a jug. You don't need to be so precious about it. A lot of people talk about you have to wait until it's cooled to blood temperature or body temperature, where if you put your finger in it, you couldn't tell the difference between what you're feeling. I do not agree with that because I think you can temper your eggs in this solution. So we talk about tempering. It's quite a technical term, but you're just kind of adjusting temperature. You're getting something used to that temperature. If you're working quickly, you can add those eggs where they won't curdle, but it is still hot. You want to make sure you have the right amount of egg going into your choux pastry. It can vary from day to day how much exactly egg you need for the recipe. I always would say to start with mix up 4 eggs in your jug. And this isn't about the size of your eggs. It's more about how you as an individual cooked your flour out. If you cooked it out for a minute less than I did, you're going to need slightly less egg.
Oh.
If you cooked it for a minute more than I did, you're going to need slightly more egg. And we're talking about small amounts of egg, but it does make a difference in this dish. So instead of cracking your eggs all into the mixture, because you won't be able to get it back if you slightly over egg it, just give them a bit of a whisk up in a jug first and add them in little by little there until you've got the right texture. But it also could be about what size your saucepan is. If you use a massive saucepan, you've given the liquid more of a chance to evaporate before you've got your flour in, whereas if you use a small saucepan, there's less chance for it evaporating before you put your flour in, so that could make a difference. But that's why it's completely dependent not only on you as a person, how you work, but from time to time. You know, I could make this recipe with these exact batch of ingredients 3 times over and need just a slightly different amount of egg every single time. But that's why when you know what to look for, it's simpler than it sounds.
And this is the whole drop thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we start incorporating the eggs, you'll see the texture start to change, and what you want to look for, which is quite a traditional thing, you want to look for when you hold some of the finished mix on your spatula and allow it to drop, you want a V left behind. If
Right.
you've not got a V, if you've got a W, or you've got nothing left behind, you've got the wrong amount of egg in there.
We're back with the mixture. So
Yep,
the flour, water and milk mixture and butter
it's cooled down.
is cooled down enough
Yeah.
for you to be able to add eggs to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not quite body temperature, but it's definitely not going to curdle the eggs. The most
Okay.
important thing, I think, when you're adding eggs into the same pan that you've been working in is more that the pan's cooled down,
Right.
so that the pan's not hot, that it's going to cook eggs anymore. If you're stuck for time, what you can always do is just tip this out into a different bowl, and then you can pretty much straight away start adding the eggs.
Okay, because you haven't got the heat of the
Yeah,
pan
exactly.
around it.
As long as you work quickly, if you did that, you could start straight away.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm just going to start adding the eggs in kind of a little bit at a time. You can do a bit more at the start if you want, but it almost looks like it's curdled when you first start adding eggs, so it is actually good practice just to add in a little bit at a time.
Okay, so don't go full wax straight
No,
off.
it will get a bit unmanageable to try and get it incorporated if you add it all in one go.
Got to
You
say,
can
it
see
smells amazing in this kitchen because we can smell your cake baking.
Yeah,
It smells lovely.
you just want to basically mix it until it's completely incorporated, no sign of egg anymore. I'll show you what I mean by the V as well, because we're not at that point yet, but you'll see the difference. You want to get a dollop of it on your spatula and just coax it to drop off. We've not got anything there. When
It's what's left.
When it's the right texture, what's left on the spatula will give you this V
Whereas
shape.
this is just broken straight
It's just
off.
broken straight off. So we're going to need
So what
another
does that
egg.
mean?
Definitely.
Another egg?
Yeah. I'll crack that straight in because I'm quite confident that it's going to take that whole egg. But at home, you could just give it another mix in a jug and then add it in. That's a really orange yolk.
Oh,
that one.
really orange yolk.
I went to a conference once, all about food manufacture, and there was a company there who specialised in chicken feed, and they would give you a little colour chart, a bit like you get for picking out your paint colour, and you could select what colour you wanted your yolk to be, and they would manufacture a feed that would get you that colour of
So
yolk.
it's nothing to do with whether it's been ranging freely or how
Not
it's
really.
lived. It's all to do with what it's been fed.
Exactly. So again, we'll try the test if we pick some up.
Just picking some up out of the bowl
Plopping
to drop
it
it
off.
off. Oh,
There we go.
look at that.
We've just about got our V
Just
shape.
about got a V shape hanging
So-
off the bottom of the spatula.
I'm not going to add another egg. I'm just going to make sure I've got every drop out of this jug.
So all this work that you're doing by hand could have been done in a mixer?
Absolutely, yeah. You
Okay.
can do it in a mixer. Once you've got your cooked, flour, butter, water mix, just transfer that to a mixer bowl. And then what you can do to speed down the cooling process is just put it on with the paddle attachment and the air will cool it.
Okay.
And then you can, from there, just add your egg while it's running. Dribble at a time. There you go.
Oh, wow. So Sophie's just tested again and we have a V shape hanging off the spoon, spatula.
There you go.
Look at that. Absolutely. What would you like the oven on for these choux buns?
About 200, please.
200?
So 180 fan.
180 fan?
Yeah. So I like to put this in a piping bag, but if you don't have a piping bag, you can just use a teaspoon to put little dollops of it on your lined baking tray.
So Sophie is now putting all of this lovely yellow mixture into a piping bag. We have got a baking tray lined with baking paper, parchment paper, in bag.
And then if I could have a little dish of water, that would be really useful.
So I take it the water's going to be to put a little bit of water over the top?
I just like to, so I pipe my little rounds, and then for a bit more of a professional finish, I just like to dip my finger in the water and pat the little tip down, because it will have a little spike from where it's released from the piping bag. That sometimes burns if it catches too soon. So I just like to dip my finger and press it down to make sure that it's going to bake really evenly.
And you've got water on your finger so it doesn't stick?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just going to pipe about the size of, it's kind of about a 50p piece in diameter.
You're going to do some little rounds.
Yeah.
So you're not making too much space apart?
No, they won't stick to one another. Even if they do, it's not the end of the world because they're so delicious you can just eat them all in one go.
So you're going to put a load of splodges of the choux pastry across the baking paper.
Yeah, and you could always do these as eclairs as well, just pipe
So
long ones.
so you could do it as a long strip as well, couldn't you, if that's what you wanted to do?
100%. Or sheets, or you can even do them as, if you ever have had a Paris breast, it's a really delicious dessert, or a gâteau Saint-Honoré, you can pipe them into kind of rings and do it that way as well. Gâteau Saint-Honoré is delicious, and Gâteau Saint-Honoré is named after Saint Honoré, who is the patron saint of bakers.
Okay.
So pray to Saint Honoré if you ever have a loaf that's going wrong.
Could you freeze that choux mix?
What you'd be better doing is baking them off and then freezing them baked. You can freeze it, but you don't always get the best rise when you come to bake it off. Sometimes they are a little bit stodgy.
Okay.
So I would recommend baking them first and then freezing them.
So you're just getting your fingertip into the water and just dabbing them just to take down any peaks or anything like that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
If you wanted to as well, because this is so plain, you could do these sweet or savoury. You could top them with cheese and black pepper or paprika for a real kind of 70s moment for savoury, or nibbed sugar, icing sugar. You can even make something called a craquelin, which is almost like a pastry, and you make it, roll it out thin, cut little discs of it and stick it on the top, and as it both bakes, you get this really nice crackle effect.
I have seen that on the bake-off. I have.
Or obviously you can just keep them completely plain and put cream in the middle and chocolate on top, and then they're profiteroles. But I like to just add this nibbed sugar. You can be quite generous with it, because as they bake, it puffs out so much. If you've only got a few little dots on there, you've barely got anything on it by the end of it. So you can be quite liberal with it.
So if we used the other half and we made something savoury, what kind of cheese would you put on it?
Parmesan, cheddar, red Leicester.
Okay.
Anything kind of a medium hard
grate somewhere,
cheese.
just put it across the top.
With a kind of fine grater, I would just grate it directly over the top, because then also what you get is not only the nice cheese on the top, but if you grate it directly with a fine grater, you get the kind of crispy feet from where the cheese on the baking tray has baked off completely.
And how long do you bake these for?
These bake for between 10 and 15 minutes. If you're going to bake them in advance to keep them for something, it's quite important that before you get them out of the oven, you just take them and pierce them with a cocktail stick or a knife or something to allow the steam to release, and then put them back in the oven for a further couple of minutes.
Okay.
That will stop them from getting soggy. Yeah, that will dry them out. But if you're going to eat them on the same day or, in a minute, then it's not worth the hassle. But
okay, so we've got little bits of salt, sugar on the top, and they're going to go in the oven.
Yep.
Okay.
You're listening to the Foodbod Pod with Shanna Sourdough and Matthews Cotswold Flour.
Shanna's Sourdough has everything you need to start making beautiful sourdough, from the starter to the roaster and everything in between. Shanna's Sourdough for all of your Foodbod sourdough baking essentials.
Matthews Cotswold Flour, bringing you Britain's largest speciality flour range.
Is cake ready?
Cake's ready, I think.
Yes. The smell in here is amazing, and those choux buns have really puffed up already.
Yeah, it doesn't take long for them.
Here comes the cake.
Okay,
Wow.
to put that down on there then. That's hot. That goes on there.
So we've got the cake still in the middle of the pan.
Yeah.
My pan, which has been, it's had honey melded to it. You promised me it was going to bake, so
I
you're going to
did
put
promise,
a plate over the top.
Now this is where it gets a little bit dicey, so...
Turning the whole thing over.
Yeah.
So if we take
that one off, yeah, that
taking
should be
the pan off the top,
and then it should
be able
release
to
out of here,
and lift.
so we'll be able to lift that off.
Oh look!
There we go. We will go in eventually and just trim this top off so that it sits flush on the cake, and that's really good for having as little offcuts. But
wow!
there you have
it. Look at the top of that. Oh, look at all the nuts set into it, and the smell. Oh, you can really smell the honey.
It makes it such a nice kind of dark crust around the top. So tasty.
It looks amazing.
And then, yeah, like I said, we'll go in eventually when it's cooled down a little and just cut that mound off.
Yeah.
And again, that's really nice. Just
You've got a bit to taste.
Yeah, and I keep quite a lot of my cake offcuts in freezer bags in my freezer, because then whenever I'm decorating a similar cake, if I'm icing it, I quite like to use a little bit of cake crumb on the top as a decoration. So you can do loads of things with your cake crumbs, or sometimes I'll add them in if I'm making like French toast. I'll just add a bit of cake crumb in there, or cake pops. They're not really trendy anymore, but you can still make cake pops or anything like that. I mean, they go into all sorts. Or the best one actually is if you make bread pudding, not bread and butter pudding, bread pudding. You can add your cake crumbs into bread pudding, and it just kind of sweetens it up nicely.
Wow. It's
So
all round to Sophie's, I reckon.
Stuff you do with the cake crumbs when you're finished with it doesn't go to waste. But yeah, there we go.
Well, I have to say that looks amazing.
trim
It
it in a
smells
minute.
fabulous.
You can smell the nuts and the honey. for
Yeah,
sure.
I can smell it all. All caramelised.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's nice with the little kind of creme fraiche, or I sometimes would serve it with custard or anything like that, but it's good on its own.
Would you say you have a sweet tooth?
Not so much. If I was going to choose between having a starter or a dessert at a restaurant, it would always be starter. I would never choose to get a dessert instead.
As a vegetarian, a
Yeah.
lot of the time I would just choose a selection of starters.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's often where the vegetarian element is.
Yeah,
in restaurants
exactly.
that didn't have so much vegetarian stuff.
Yeah, yeah. My chouquettes are puffed
The little
off as
chouquettes
well.
are really puffed up. They look
Yeah.
amazing.
The cheese ones are getting going down there. The cheese ones we've got on the second rack of the oven probably won't come up as high.
Yeah, I find the same. If you put something underneath
exactly.
another tray.
It doesn't always come up
Yeah,
as nicely.
so we can swap that.
There we go.
There we go. Wow.
There you go.
Okay, we'll
I'll
let it cool
get
down a
a
bit.
knife in a minute and just trim
Yeah.
the top off.
Okay.
My chouquettes. They
Those
are
chouquettes.
ready, pretty much. The ones that we did with nib sugar are ready to come out.
They are so pretty. They
I
are
think
just so
you'll
cute.
like these, Elaine, because they are a sweet treat, but they're not that sweet because it's
Look
only
at
really
that.
sweet from the nib sugar on top.
And the challenge, of course, is not to want to bite into one immediately.
Yes, they're too
and
hot.
Then
You
have
have to-
all the hot air coming out of it.
Yeah. If
They
you were
are
gonna,
so light.
so that's all you would do if you wanted them to
So
stay up
what
forever.
you've done with a
is
sharp
just-
knife is just
poke
poke
a
a
little
hole,
Poke a little hole in the bottom,
just to stop them from.
just to allow the steam to release.
Okay, and that would
then-
help them to last a bit then.
Yeah, and then you put them back in and just allow them to
But
really
then,
dry
but
out
if you're
for a
going to
minute.
eat them straight off, you don't need
No,
to do that.
you don't need to do that. If you're going to eat them straight away, they're fine as they are.
I almost can't cope with that because they come straight out the oven perfect, and you've picked them up and put holes in them.
Yeah, but that's why you do it on the bottom. Look, you can't tell at all.
No, this is very true. They look beautiful.
They're really delicious. If you can get hold of them in France, it's worth doing because they're such a treat. And as delicious as mine are, I think it's the feeling of being away on holiday.
Yeah,
Just
and it's a
makes them
representation.
Delicious, yeah.
So we're just having a little test here. They are so light.
They're completely hollow. And you could still fill these with a pastry cream or, whipped cream or anything like that if you wanted to. But
I think,
they're just good as they are, I think.
But filled with something as well, yeah.
Mm.
They're just perfect. And you've just knocked them up in no time. They're amazing. And we've just got the little cheesy ones.
Yeah. Which are
So-
just getting a bit crispy.
Yeah, they look a bit different just because they've got a different topping.
Yeah.
So they've got the fat from the cheese across the top.
Yeah. That is something to note. The softer cheese you use, the less they're going to come up. So if you
It's
use
heavy.
something like a really crumbly Parmesan or something like that, they'll still rise as much as these ones do.
Oh, okay. So we used red Leicester across the
Yeah,
top of these.
which is great
so it's a bit
flavour,
weightier.
but a bit weightier, yeah. Exactly.
Okay. I've loved this because you know I love you and because I think you have so much to share. And we really hope that everybody has loved all these tips. They love the recipes.
Yes.
Sophie answers a lot of questions already. If you do have any, send them to me and I will pose them to her. Watching you work, it's all processes. It's just follow the steps. It's like,
That's it,
you know,
yeah.
and all of it, really just follow the steps and have faith, really, especially with the choux pastry. It's just trust in the texture, trust in the
big
process
time.
of
Well,
it.
it's the same as what you preach with sourdough. You know, baking can be so simple.
Yeah.
If you stop panicking and you just take everything as it comes, you don't need to panic. It's all going to be fine. Worst case scenario, it's not going to, the world's not going to end.
Well, this is very true, and it will always taste of something.
Exactly. I always
Yeah.
say to people, when they're starting out baking, never throw anything away because there's always a use for it.
Yeah.
Your loaf of bread didn't rise. You can cut that up and turn that into croutons or breadcrumbs, or
Always.
there's always
Yeah.
something you can do with it. And you might find actually that you stumble across something really delicious without realising.
Oh, I think every time.
Yeah,
If something didn't turn out how you thought it was going to, you've made a whole new recipe, in my view.
exactly.
So, how are these cheesy
Yeah, these
ones?
are probably about ready. So we'll get this out now.
Here comes our cheesy chouquettes.
Yep.
Oh, cool.
There we are. And
So
that's
nice
the nice
little
bit.
puffs.
You get the little cheesy skirt on the bottom.
The little fun cheesy bits.
Yeah, crispies. We would call them probably in my house crispies.
Well, these are all going to go on yet another rack. Luckily, we are in a baking household, so there is many, many racks.
I get this one.
We will take some more shots of them. We will pick Sophie's brain as much as possible, and we will make sure that you have these recipes. I mean, these, surely, when you're coming into the festive season,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, just
Really good.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
good. Really easy to pimp up and pimp down in so many ways.
Exactly, very, very quick to make. And again, you don't have to pipe them. If you were getting a mechanical ice cream scoop, again, you can get them in any size. So if you were going to do these
little melon baller or
yeah,
something.
melon baller, anything like that, just to quickly deposit, teaspoon size or tablespoon, however big you want them. But it is something that you can just whack in the oven if you've got people arriving, and it's so quick and so easy, and you can flavour them with whatever you like, really.
Absolutely, and
The
I can
sky's the limit.
see that the paprika element,
Yeah.
that would have been the thing.
Yeah, that would have been huge. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But you can make them really small, make them giant, do whatever you like with them. But it's such a good pastry to master because people think it's so impressive. So it's a
Yeah.
really good one, and it's so versatile, much more so than you think. You can easily make it into a number of desserts and even starters.
Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Sophie lives a very long way from me, so she's come a very long way to come and do this. So we really hope that everybody's
It's been a
enjoyed it.
pleasure.
She will be back.
Yeah,
There's going to be festive baking.
there is. We're doing some exciting stuff together.
Oh,
so-
there's going to be festive stuff. There's going to be Christmas lights. There's going
Yeah.
to be music. David's going, oh my God, in the background. But there's going to be a really nice end to the year.
Yes.
And Sophie is going to feed our palates. And we will be doing more and more together.
Yes.
So look out for
Yeah, absolutely.
it. But we're going to say goodbye for now and put these on a rack, and we might let David try one finally. Always at the end of the party, ain't David?
Perfect. Thank you
You've
for
been
having
brilliant.
me.
You've been brilliant, brilliant. David, all I can smell is this baking in my kitchen.
The aromas in your kitchen are wonderful.
So good. So in front of us we have what's left
Yes.
of the chouquettes with their little nibbed sugar on the top, and the other version with some cheese on, and the cake, the upside down honey and pecan cake, and the smell, that just a slight And she didn't put a lot of ginger and cinnamon in it, but it can really smell it. It smells amazing.
Well, there's a little offcut from the cake because she had to...
It's even more little than it was.
Which we've tried. And indeed there are a couple of muffins because there's a bit of the mix left over. So 2 scoops went into muffin cases. And you can just detect the cinnamon and the ginger. It's really lovely.
And I think it will only get stronger as well.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's just watching her. She'd never been to my kitchen before. She just walked in and got straight on.
She was so at ease, wasn't she?
Yeah, completely at ease, completely comfortable with everything. She knows her ingredients inside out. She knows what what to look for, the feel, the look, the actions. Just baking superstar as far as I'm concerned. I think she's brilliant.
Yeah, no, very good. I agree with you about just watching her. It's she's just instinctive, isn't she? And she knows how to recognise when something's ready.
And when you make choux pastry, it can be scary because it does get to a point where it looks a bit like sick. It looks a bit like uncooked, scrambled eggs, and then it looks...
It's a nice way of describing it. How appetising.
But it goes through so many stages and it can look curdled.
Yes.
And you have to keep going.
Yes.
And keep beating it. And you can do it in a machine. She did it all by hand, which maybe is the answer to ageing arms.
Machine for me every time, I'm afraid.
Amazing. I'm so grateful she came a long way today to be here with us. I hope people have enjoyed listening. I hope they've learnt from her. I hope they like the recipes.
Yeah, do try them.
Yeah, and Sophie will be back. She will be back with us before the end of the year. And Sophie and I will also be doing more work together. So I'm just, massive thank you to Sophie for joining us. But for today, I need you to pack up a load of this stuff and take it away from my kitchen.
I have to tell you that will not be an issue. In fact, I do have the carrier bag ready and waiting.
Absolutely. So I was going to take a couple of photos and then ask you to just remove it whilst the dog keeps scouting for cake crumbs.
I'll be delighted to. I've got a 2.5 hour drive and I think a lot of these are going to get eaten on the way.
I'm going to take a photo and ask Helen at the other end. What did David arrive home with or without?
Yeah, most of them will be gone. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Back to the diet tomorrow. Anyway, that's it for this edition of the Foodbod Pod.
Thank you for joining us. I've been Elaine Body.
I'm David Treadway.
And this is the Foodbod Pod.
With Matthews Cotswold Flour.
And Shanna Sourdough.